Welcome to Show Studio. It's our very last roundup panel of the season. So it's a sad one, but it's a good one because we're talking about Paris, and that's the one where there are just so many shows to get through, so many different aesthetics, so many different ideas, and you've got young designers, you've got major, huge brands, so it's a really exciting one to unpick. And it was an interesting season just in terms of kind of sort of hijinks and theatrics as well, lots to unpick there. I've got an amazing set of women with me to help talk about what we saw at the shows, but before we kind of delve into our discussion, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with you, Anna.
Hello, I'm Anna Murphy and I'm Fashion Director at The Times.
I'm Pandora Sykes and I'm Fashion Features Editor at Sunday Times Style.
I'm Susie Lau and I'm a fashion blogger and freelance journalist.
Everyone's gone really sober and serious. So it's a massive question, but I was trying to work out kind of what show to start with and what to kick off with, and it was really hard because, you know, you could go to something like Valentino purely because of the press that generated, because of the Zoolander stunt, or you could go, you know, to something like, you know, Junya, which was just everyone thought was so beautiful. So it's a really hard one to pinpoint. So I'm going to let you guys do it for me. Did anyone have a highlight, a standout show?
Funnily enough, I think for me, Junya was one of them because it was just beyond beautiful. And there's always that question when you go to a show, it's theatre, but there's also the commercial side. What are we watching? What's important? And I think Junya really nailed it for me this season in that it truly was art, but there were also such incredibly wearable things in it. There were jackets that you wanted to walk away with. And it was such a sort of stillness in the storm of Paris. There was so much going on, as you say, but there was just such a focus to that show and such beauty.
It was definitely one idea executed exceedingly well. Like, yeah, I was actually like just floored by the technicality of like a lot of those garments and that they were, as Anna said, completely wearable. Like you are able to wear this, you know, technical feat on your body, and that's like a really rare thing to do, to have innovation actually in fashion these days is a rare thing.
Tell me more about that. What do you mean?
Well, I think when we're looking at shows, you know, I think maybe it's just the era of fashion that we're in at the moment. Is, you know, what we're seeing is they're not necessarily completely new ideas, and a lot of it is generally kind of like references rehashed and eras rehashed, and you know, true like innovation, like things that we've physically never seen before, are like, you know, it's hard to come by.
But I think also often people are going for innovation, they're going for the shock of the new, possibly at the expense of other things. And what was amazing about Junya was you thought, wow, how does that happen? But gosh, I really want to wear that. That is so beautiful. And that actually a sort of, you know, 70-year-old very chic woman could have worn some of that, which is not the conception of that label, just as a sort of directional 25-year-old would.
Absolutely. We were talking about that actually this morning on our Milan roundup discussion, is this idea of blending sort of the commercial with the creative, which is obviously an age-old idea in fashion, but we were talking about the designers who do it best, and we pointed to someone like Miuccia Prada, are designers where they kind of do that within the same garment. It's not like you see a collection where there are some pieces that are kind of conceptual and crazy and some pieces that are very wearable. It's when actually specific garments, and I thought that was one thing that was really interesting with Junya, is you looked at the pieces, as you say, but it was the pieces, it wasn't just the whole show, and you thought, God, that's amazing, how was it made? But you also thought, I want to wear it, which was, it was an interesting one. I think it's interesting how it gets us thinking about Paris, because something like this is so different to what you see elsewhere. What were your highlights, Pandora?
I was just thinking, I feel like there's so many dichotomies now in the whole kind of fashion show fanfare, like the statement that you just made of Valentino because of the Zoolander stunt. Like I never thought I'd hear those words.
It's so strange.
And I think there is more and more that kind of I suppose that balance, like even something like Givenchy with all of the, you know, the face jewelry and the gems and stuff, that seems really, really extreme, really like, God, who would ever want to wear that? But I was talking to a girl the other day who's got a really simple kind of 90s style. She was like, oh, I've been looking for a kind of nose ring, a bit like that one that Riccardo Tisci did. Like, the fact that that is now becoming more and more that way of balancing things, and obviously in terms of the clothes that balanced out with the face gems, there was actually a lot of really wearable stuff there. So I love that you're now at a point where, yes, you've got Zoolander, a Valentino, but you're also at a point where you're kind of considering, I don't know, face gems with a black dress. So
no, it is interesting. I think there were two things I do feel like both of those things you just cited that kind of ruled Paris Fashion Week. It was like endless close-ups of that look that Pat McGrath had done at Givenchy, and then endless Instagrams of the Zoolander thing, which is sad.
With blue steel.
What did everyone think of that, of the Valentino stuff?
Have you heard what Karl Lagerfeld said about it, which is quite funny?
No, yeah, he didn't. He
yeah, he was like, he said something. I can't remember. He said something. He found it quite disgusting, and he said that he was asked to appear in the film, but he didn't want to.
Yeah, it's just such a weird fit for Valentino.
It was the weirdest show for it to happen at. That was the strangest thing.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say it took anything away from the collection itself, because I thought it was a really beautiful standout collection. Yeah. And yes, okay, I don't know, for me the main takeaway wasn't the Zoolander thing. I still came away thinking that was a great collection, and that stunt is not going to take anything away from that. That collection will go on beyond this viral moment, which got them a lot of
I mean, they had their cake and ate it, didn't they? Because the collection was beautiful, everyone loved it, rightly so, and they were Instagrammed up to the skies. And I think what they just demonstrated superlatively with that collection is that they've completely nailed their language. We know what they're going to do, but in a good sense, not a bad sense, and they create these very, very beautiful clothes that are both kind of modern but also have this kind of historicism to them that is gorgeous.
They never get that wrong for me. I can't remember ever looking at it and being like, oh, that's a bit gross. Like, it's always just the level of detail, and their USP is so distinct now. I don't think you ever look at it and think that. But whilst obviously always offering something new, you know, sometimes it's much prettier, or sometimes with this, you know, there's like the lashings of leather, and there's definitely a sexiness about it, and there's always something new, but it is just so incredibly strong always.
And what's interesting about them as well, there's always this question, isn't there, with their heritage brand, be it Valentino or Chanel, you know, and you're the new designer or designers, how do you iterate that for the future? And what they've done is, of course, they've referenced aspects of Valentino, beautiful white shirts, etc., etc. But they have created a new vernacular, as it were, and it's one that completely works. And
you see the influence. I always say this on every panel, so it's kind of boring. But I feel like everyone talks about the influence of Saint Laurent and how Eddie Slimane kind of affecting what everyone else is doing. But I think if there's any house that has had impact on other houses, it's Valentino. You know, just that prim aesthetic is so ubiquitous now, and I think they really, really sort of brought that back, and you see it everywhere.
Long sleeves, longer lengths, everywhere.
Maybe it was UCZ.
No, but honestly, like when you look at sort of more contemporary mid-level brands, and like, oh, they're doing a Valentino. It's Maria and Pierpaolo. It's them. It's their USP now.
Yeah, and I think even that kind of historical, we saw everyone was talking about the 70s, and I don't think that was particularly specific, something that Valentino pioneered, but I don't think that trend would have felt right, perhaps, without the language that they started to put into fashion, which was interesting. Just going back to that Valentino stunt, does it say a lot about the way fashion is communicated online? Because it did make me think, you know, rightly or wrongly, a high fashion collection would never have that reach without that kind of a stunt. And I found the way it was reported quite interesting, because I think they'd been very clever in the footage of the stunt. You know, they ensured that the models did a walkthrough and that you had to look at the collection in the video. But actually, most of the articles written up about it didn't really include looks from the catwalk at all. It was just about the stunt.
I mean, in a way, it's a different version of what Chanel has been doing so consummately for so many seasons. You know, part of it is about the clothes, and part of it is about this season, the incredible brasserie and the, you know, amazing.
Which is strange that Karl Lagerfeld would then go and poo-poo.
Yes, exactly.
Them for doing it, because I mean, it's true. They both do play on the idea of the mise en scène, or in this case, the stunt, the celebrity appearance on the runway.
And actually, it's interesting for me as a writer for a newspaper, when you're pitching. You know, I'm writing partly for a fashion audience, as you are, but also for a newspaper mainstream readership. And when you're pitching a show to them, if you can say to them, "Oh, it's set in a brasserie," immediately you've got them.
They give you the hook now. You don't have to look. The hooks are so blatant. But it used to just be about the front row as well. It used to be that, like, you know, do we put Kanye on our front row and know that, you know, like after Balmain, when people literally almost died in the sort of paparazzi storm, or, you know, you've got someone like Acne who wouldn't have him at their show. But it's now even on the catwalk, like, you know, there's no denying that Kendall Jenner is having such an incredibly successful time in fashion, because it's going to make a huge difference to how the show's reported, and the casting of the models has become so much more important, I think, with the advent of social media. You know, when I was looking at the Louis Vuitton show again the other day, and I was thinking, God, that casting's so good. They had like Leah Kebede in there, but then they had some of the younger models with, you know, big profiles, and that mix is now something Giles always does really well as well. But that mix is just as crucial, because the models are as important as the front row, and there's kind of the stunts are everywhere. I don't even think they're stunts anymore. It's so ingrained.
And the Instagram user figures have now overtaken Twitter, haven't they? You know, and Instagram is the social media of choice for fashion lovers and the fashion community. So I think it is the only way is up, really, isn't it? And the more you integrate your stunt, quotes unquotes, into your collection in the way that Chanel does so well, the better for the brand building.
Does it become difficult writing about fashion though, because, you know, if the hook is so much, you know, as all the things you very astutely mentioned, things like the front row, things like, you know, the casting, things like the set, is it harder to then, you know, convince your editors or sort of the news desk or whatever that you need space to also cover the clothes? Because I feel like there's so much focus now on.
I think, speaking again from a newsroom perspective, it's always been quite hard to get coverage of the clothes. You know, they want a few pictures. Do they want you to talk about, you
needle
know,
punching?
Yes. Do they even know what it is? Probably not. But so I don't think it takes away from the detail on the clothes. And in a way, I personally think you can sort of get more in there.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got your kind of, if you know, your Trojan horse is the Brasserie or Zoolander or whatever, that kind of helps.
But it's kind of part of this rising thing where, you know, the shift is away from the clothes, whether we're talking about in a newspaper article or not. In that brands, the way they build up, you know, loyalty and a universe around them isn't the clothes aren't the number one focus. It's the campaigns, it's the
stories,
packaging,
isn't it?
it's the mood, it's the attitude, vibes, like to use like an abstract term. You know, if we look at like, you know, brand makeovers like Loewe, for instance, like that is not necessarily centered around the clothes. It's really about the culture of it, and that's what's evocative, I think, for people. And that's how a fashion consumer buys fashion.
I was thinking about that, and it'd be really interesting to get wardrobe mistress perspective on this, because I was thinking, because of how kind of strong the high street is and how many great kind of, you know, everyday pieces you can get on the high street, do you think we have got to that point where you go to the kind of low level or contemporary brands or high street for your pieces, and then if you are buying high fashion, it perhaps isn't for the pieces because you want to associate with a world or associate with an idea? Because I think, you know, to see the way people are buying, I'm not sure what I think about it. I was thinking about it with Loewe and thinking, actually, if someone's buying that, they're not buying it because it's a great piece. They're probably buying it to buy into the sense of like arts and craft. And
I mean, the bonus is that when you go into the store, the pieces are great. Actually, you know, they are really beautiful. But what gets you over the door isn't necessarily like what you remember about the clothes, but it is that imagery and it's similar to, you know, how like, I don't know, like Carol and Umberto have rejigged Kenzo. You know, again, it's that universe.
It's got to be both, hasn't it? I mean, Kenzo's doing so well because there's incredible things that you want to have, but also because they've created a narrative, and it is all about telling stories. And I think, you know, back to your point earlier, you said there's so much going on, especially in Paris. Precisely because there is so much going on, that's why you, as your brand, you have to have your story. You have to have your killer pieces, but you have to have the people you're aiming at, the people who represent you, the narratives around that, in order to really kind of do well.
Who's getting it completely right? Susie kind of mentioned Loewe. Is there anyone else who's really nailing it?
Well, I mean, you know, Valentino is as discussed, is all about their story, isn't it? I mean, Celine, she's always been incredible at having a really strong identity and a really strong woman, and her ad campaigns continue to be brilliant. And I think it is really interesting, Celine, this season, seeing her kind of shift her story on a bit. It was very recognisably her in many ways, and yet it was also, you know, it had embellishment, and it had a sort of at times almost girliness to it.
I think that woman is becoming less aloof and less sort of detached from, you know, just this very pristine vision, which is how I would have defined like the first.
It's much less uptight,
Phoebe
wasn't it?
Did for Celine, and now it's becoming looser, like just kind of things flailing around, and I don't know, that woman seems like someone you would actually want to be.
I feel like a few, sorry.
No, go on, go.
Because I feel like a few brands did that though this season, like Nicolas Ghesquière as well. You know, there was less of that kind of, well, less of the retro and more of the new, but still, even though I love, you know, my heart will always belong to the 70s even before it became a trend. I know, it's so painful. My wardrobe's full of suede and I'm now really on trend.
Well, it's so funny how Nicolas Ghesquière, you know, like that blog, like, Balenciaga did it first.
Yeah.
It was like a Tumblr blog. And now suddenly everyone is doing that Nicolas Ghesquière first season for Vuitton thing.
Yeah.
You know, like you just see like copious amounts of suede, like those little polo necks, you know, it's become such a formula now, and it just goes to show like how much he's still sort of leading the pack, basically. Where he goes,
Which
people
is
will
strange,
go.
because when he did that collection, people were like, "Oh, it's not as pioneering as usual."
Yeah, but it somehow
it's very
seeped
reactionary."
in.
It did. It I find that weird.
It
He's very good at doing
permeated
that.
people's brains, and that's what makes him so great.
Because when you look at, it is that thing, when you look at something again, you can have a completely different opinion.
Yeah.
And sometimes when you're at a show and you're really enjoying the setting, and I don't know, you're sitting next to someone really interesting, you think it's really great because you're in a great mood, and then you come out of that whole feeling and you're like, that just doesn't really resonate with me, and you can't really remember why it ever made you empathise with it in the first place. But I think the narrative is really, really important. It's something I feel like Chloe does really strongly, and I love that even when people are like, oh no, we're all about, you know, androgyny, and, you know, she's just still doing that flower girl thing, and that's something that was really, really different, I think, this season as well. Like, that was not just some floaty free spirit, that was definitely a kind of woman who knew what she wanted and knew and taken it on in a different way, kind of shaping more sides to women. I think that's what really does set it apart from the high street. I know you mentioned that earlier. I have to obviously do a lot of high street, and I'm really passionate about the high street, so that's not something I have a problem with unless it is exceptionally cheap, and then it obviously gets pretty problematic. But I think when people are like, oh, you know, Zara, the whole Balenciaga, Celine, like you can do that with, I mean, it's hilarious. I'll go through the whole thing and find so many pieces. But I don't think it's a threat, because the people buying that are not buying into a narrative. You know, you still, it's like when I went into Celine the other day and bought a pair of shoes, and like the feeling I got from that is not the same as buying my dress from Zara. And quite frankly, a lot of people can't afford to ever do that. So you are talking about different women, and then you've got women in the middle.
It's
like
so much
me.
about associating with her as well, and it's why the designers become kind of maybe more pivotal, like in I don't know, in your kind of informing your opinion about a brand, and informing that kind of like we said, universe is like that persona.
Because you feel cool by buying it, you feel like you're kind of on their taste level for however fleeting
associating with her.
But also, you know, at the Chloe show, it was just obvious that the clothes were really beautifully made, weren't they? You know, I'm all for a bit of high street broader anglais, but you can always tell it's that. Whereas you looked at some of those things and they just were completely gorgeous. I mean, one of the things I was quite interested by, I think with Chloe and Celine and various other shows in some of the other countries, is this idea of sort of the new sexy. You know, Phoebe spoke after the show about, oh, well, you know, Celine woman, she's not really into sexy, but I kind of wanted to sort of start to go there. And, you know, you take someone like Victoria Beckham in New York, who did the, you know, very straight down the line version of sexy for years. And there's this new kind of undoneness, kind of looseness, this new way of looking at how to dress a woman, or rather how a woman dresses herself to be kind of sensual but still kind of strong, that I found really interesting in quite a lot of the collections this season.
I think that's why the casting of models has become so important when you're watching the show, and how the clothes are perceived, because, you know, Binks is obviously doing amazingly well, and she really does have that kind of attitude and that spirit. And in terms of kind of the new sexiness, there's a model, I can't remember her surname, called Mika, who's got this, we've just seen her at Chloe, and she's got this shaggy fringe and that kind of dishevelled hair, and she basically walked for everyone. I remember seeing her at Carven, and there is this, there we go, right in the middle, in the grey suit.
Oh yeah, she was
She's got this, there's this real sexiness. It's, you know, we've seen it with Freya before, but I think it just reminds you how much the hair, the makeup, the everything is so crucial. It is not just about the clothes.
It's a strength,
so
isn't
much
it?
more.
It's a real strength that I think, some of the best designers are channeling, and as you say, models are a part of that.
Yeah, it does feel like it's more maybe about the attitude and the gesture
Yeah.
rather than the sort of aesthetics, you know, when we're talking about this season. I don't know, yeah, like Anna said, that kind of undoneness or sexiness but not overt, and that kind of, yeah, that relationship between a woman and her clothing, I don't know, feels a bit more pertinent this season.
You even had like Balmain trying to kind of get away from the overt sexiness by
Yeah.
dropping his hemlines, and I don't think it really worked. You know, the trouser suits didn't do much for them, so I can't even imagine what I would look like in one. But you know, the USP, the best thing he does is the pussy pelmet hemline, and you know, the fact that even Olivier's like, right, okay, I'm gonna, you know, try and do this different type of sexiness, I think really kind of spells out that there is that collective interest in representing sexuality in a different way, and thank God. I don't think it means that everyone should be doing it, because it doesn't work for all
it's
designers.
hard though, isn't it? Because it's interesting that you mentioned Chloe, because Chloe's kind of so on trend now because of that whole 70s thing, but I think there was a period where it felt like a little bit like it had fallen behind in terms of kind of being
and she
on the
stayed
money.
kind of strong to doing what she was great at doing, but you're right,
you
there
kind
was
of want that in a way. You don't want to look at Balmain and see something that isn't kind of, you know, hyper sex, because the moment will come back round to that in a way. I think it's.
I think it's also that thing about the client, isn't it? I mean, the questions that have been raised by Gucci, well, what's happening there now. You know, I mean, I absolutely love what Alessandro Michele is doing at Gucci, but will the classic Gucci woman? And that again is that question, isn't it? You know, does the Chloe, you know, there's something to be said for ploughing your own furrow, as you say. You know, I do this, I do it beautifully. It's what my clients come to me and spend a lot of money on. Why suddenly reinvent the wheel next season? But it's that balancing act between the novelty that makes us get excited and write about it, and social media get excited and write about it, and actually shifting the product season after season.
I think we talked about this a lot with Gucci obviously this morning, and I think it is an interesting one, because I think there's that real struggle when something begins to go wrong with your figures, because obviously Gucci, you know, they perform incredibly well, but they did sort of like stagnate and go down. So it's kind of a case where you go, yes, they don't want to alienate the Gucci shopper because she's still a huge part of the business, but then how do they bring in a new shopper without? And I think that's that really interesting line to try and see brands walk, where they can't really U-turn. Maybe they can, it's a bold thing to do, and just try and, you know, get a huge new audience, but it's how to change without changing too much.
It's how to be all things to all people is the ultimate goal, isn't it? And some labels are really amazing at doing that, be that with their commercial collection having quite a different relationship to the catwalk collection, or a closer relationship. And it's very interesting to see how sort of different people pull it off.
I think it's interesting as well though, with lots of people being like, oh, Gucci's, you know, I am diehard fan, so obviously I'm going to be biased, but how people were saying that there weren't enough, you know, they weren't setting the bar high enough as one of the oldest fashion houses, but you still saw absolutely every store on the high street paying homage to them, whether it's the by contrast, you know, denim dress. This is MIH. I don't even know if they were influenced by them, but you know, that was something Gucci did, and the kind of length of where it hits kind of on the shin. And I mean, there are so many pieces from the military buttons to the wide leg jeans. Sorry, I can't really get it out. So passionate about it. But I think they were ripped off so much. And then but people were saying that there wasn't setting a bar. So I think there's sometimes a confusion about what does actually.
And actually, what do people on the high street want? Because most people on the high street don't necessarily want the new sexy. They want the old sexy. Thanks very much. They want to show their waist, their hips. You know. I mean, there's been lots of really interesting stats on that recently, and whether the industry at the top end is sort of getting that wrong. But yeah, it's easy to.
It's what suits people as well.
Yeah. I mean, most women, especially young women, they want to look sexy, don't they?
Well, there's all you're right. There's all this talk in fashion where we're like, oh, the new androgynous things. I love those stories where it's like, you know, the lower back or the middle back, and then you're like, well, no, because unless you're like,
in downtown Leeds on a Saturday night, they're not interested in the lower back.
Interested in like a slither of clavicle.
That's something I feel increasingly though. Like I remember watching Osman, and 9/10 of the dresses were completely backless. So unless you have no boobs at all, or you're really young and you know you've got them nicely up here, then you're not going to be able to wear that. And if even Osman's kind of doing that with backless dresses, and it's like the COS customer. You know, I know everyone waxes lyrical about COS on the high street, but it doesn't resonate with me because I'm 5'4", and if I wear that, I need, you know, if you're short, you need some sort of shape. I really believe that, unless I don't know, you know more about your body than that. But I don't know. I think a lot of women need something from their clothes that is quite traditional, I suppose.
It always makes me laugh with the backless dresses as well. You're on the red carpet, they always show the woman from behind going like that. And you kind of think, in the real life, you can't go around to going like this the whole time, can you? You basically look quite boring from the front.
Real life is Instagram now.
This is true. This is true. But do you want to do a sort of backwards selfie stick? Yeah, you have to.
Someone should invent that, like a hooked selfie stick.
There must be one.
It's already out there.
There's shoes, so there must be.
It's depressing, isn't it?
I was quite interested in what you were saying, Pandora, earlier about, you know, when you go to a show and you don't quite know what you think, you know, you get distracted by being sitting next to someone interesting. And for me, that's one of the things I always notice is a real sort of interesting question when you go to the shows. Some of it, you just come away straight away, you think, oh, I love that. Yeah. And then actually a few weeks later, you're like, And then some of the stuff you go away and you're not quite sure about it, and then you love it. I mean, I always have, not always, but I sometimes have that experience with both Miu Miu and Prada. Two of my favourite labels is I sit in the show, and most of it I love, but there'll always be a few things, and I think, oh, I'm not quite sure about those shoes. It's usually a pair of shoes I'm like, really? But now I know myself well enough to know that 2 months later I will kill for those shoes. And it's those designers who really sort of push the envelope, don't they? I mean, someone like Valentino, you go in there and it's utterly gorgeous from the start. Something like Miu Miu, you go in there and it's challenging in a really sort of exciting way. And sometimes there's a bit of a time lag in terms of what you feel about it, whether you want it in your wardrobe.
But is it that thinking that are you thinking, oh, do I want to wear it? Do I want to shoot it? Do I want to write about it? And they're all like very different kind of thought
very
concepts.
Well put. Very well put.
It's something that Pandora kind of implies is, what do you measure the success of a collection on? Is it
what are you getting out of
gasp, it? You know, if that's beautiful. Is it that it changes fashion, but no one liked it at the time? Is it that, you know, it's really, is it sales? That's one thing, you know, we talked a lot about sales on this morning's panel. You know, it's good because, you know, profit or revenue have gone up, but it's just so hard to work out. You know, you look at designers that have a huge influence but perhaps never kind of build a very strong business, and I think that's something that's really hard to pin down in fashion. Perhaps it's different for everyone who works, it's very different if you're a stylist.
What I love about Miuccia Prada, I remember interviewing her once, and she talked about how when she was a student, you know, she was a Marxist in the way that only an Italian fashion student can be. She would dress up as a sort of spaceman one day and as a kind of, you know, bullfighter the next. And she said she wasn't at all interested in how she looked in the mirror. She was interested in the concept of what she wore. And as she often says, you know, she's obsessed with this idea of racchio, ugly. And this to me is what's always so interesting about her shows, because there is a real sort of concept there. And as you say, how does that relate to what you wear and what you buy and what you shoot?
I wonder if it's ever hard for her, if she ever feels like the people who wear it don't necessarily get the concept of it. I often think about that with designers, particularly ones that become incredibly popular, where there's this disconnect between, I mean, I think obviously most designers respect their customer a huge deal, but perhaps where they understand that the customer's idea of beauty or luxury, or even the customer's kind of political bent, isn't actually on par with what the label actually stands for, and whether they ever find that tricky.
I mean, I feel Miu Miu quite coherent, and I think in the recent years it's become more coherent. I think what you see on the catwalk is kind of what you get in the store, and that's one of its strengths. Whereas Prada, you know, you have a few of those amazing catwalk pieces, but there's quite a lot of very beautiful but not very catwalky sort of crepe dresses and things.
I think she's savvy enough to know as well that just because she's obsessed with the concept of ugly, that your average woman is not. You know, she wants to look nice, most women, you know. So the fact that you can pick this apart so much, it's something that actually, I love Stella Jean, that Haitian Italian designer, and it's something that I think she does really well as well. She piles it all on, so it's completely in keeping with her aesthetic, her concept of what she wants to put out there. But when you take those pieces apart, you've got, you know, a great full skirt, a wonderful printed silk shirt, you know, even a pair of incredible cocktail earrings that someone might want to wear just with their black dress. So I think what you put out there is obviously not what you can expect necessarily. Your customer's going to buy into different bits, and some will want to buy in hook, line and sinker, but in the same way that, I don't know, you've got someone in Liverpool who's going to buy a Chanel bag, but they're certainly not going to buy a Holy tracksuit. So you know, the way that people buy into something, I think it's naive and also slightly kicking horse in the mouth, whatever that expression is, of a designer to say, I don't want this person to buy it. And surely that Kim Kardashian is an example of anyone can access high fashion, and either they roll with it and put her on their front row and become best friends with her, or they resist it. That there is that tension now, for sure, about how you engage with those kind of people.
And it is the power of the separate as well, isn't it? Because I know lots of young designers, you know, friends of mine who work sort of on the commercial side with young designers. Of course, it's really exciting to create an amazing dress or jumpsuit or whatever, but actually you need skirts, which Stella Jean is fantastic at. You need shirts, you need knitwear. Miu Miu's always got that. You need to be able to pull out those elements, as you suggest.
I think a house that does kind of what we're talking about really, really well, which is look like it's very forcefully presenting clothing for only one type of person, but actually sell it to loads and loads of people who aren't skinny and cool and in a kind of underground band, is Saint Laurent. Because actually, you know, if you speak to retailers about it, one of my favourite pastimes is going into retailers and asking who actually buys the Saint Laurent, because it is not some cool, like, androgynous
it's not this
French
girl, is
model.
it?
It's like
it always sells out
women that
on
want
their
the spangly
supporter as
blazer.
well.
Yeah.
Always.
It is. It's older women who want like the spangly blazers and like, you know, the boleros, and like it's
But
not.
That's the dichotomy. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, go on.
The dichotomy with Saint Laurent is like, for the last, I don't know, however many seasons I've been watching the show, is I take something very different away from the show than when I see it in the shops, and that is kind of why it's working.
Yeah.
You know, like I don't necessarily get every vision that comes out on the runway. In fact, I can't even see it properly most of the time, because I'm like blinded by lights, or you know, be too distracted by the soundtrack, or you know, and they're going really, really quickly.
They go so fast.
They go really fast. And then you see it in the store and it becomes a completely different thing. It is that thing about separates, like it's the great leather jacket, the pointy shoes that you suddenly start seeing on everybody. It's like just all these different elements.
As we've said, you know, the basic requirements of what a woman wants. Saint Laurent still does an absolutely beautiful tailored jacket. It's one of the best out there. What woman doesn't want an amazing tailored jacket that she can put on with anything and immediately feel and look twice as good as she did before she put it on? Doesn't matter how many decades we revisit on the catwalk or whatever, a woman still wants an incredible Le Smoking. You know, and he's still, it's that you don't see that so much on the catwalk, but it's still there in the store, isn't it?
There's this line in the Style.com review that I can't remember who wrote it, but I always remember that you know, something along the lines of, for every person in the crowd that said it looked like Forever 21, there was someone else, and I just I loved that you look at it and you're like, I suppose that tutu could look like you know, and it I don't know, I just thought it was such a funny line, but I find it a really interesting one personally, because I've bought 2 insanely expensive pairs of shoes in the last probably 9 months, but even though so much of it I just don't understand where it's coming from. I mean, there's a striped t-shirt on Net-a-Porter at the moment for £670 that has a really low scoop like that. So you know, you saw how it was on the catwalk of the last season, where you can't wear it at all unless you have nothing there. And I'll see that and I would just be fascinated, and I can't understand who's buying it. But then I can see the shoes whizzing off the shelves and everyone in.
But what's so interesting with the profits of it, because did you guys look at all the figures? Because you know the figures are astronomical. He's like doubled the
his
revenue.
figures are amazing.
But the sales are strong across every. You know, a lot of houses they'll do really well, but it's because the accessories. With him,
it's every category.
It's every category. It's bonkers, isn't it?
But I think it is because of what's in store, you know. And I think again, you know, Chanel are absolutely amazing about this. Depending on what city you go into Chanel store. Firstly, they're stocked completely differently. They're targeted at whoever it is, Germans, Koreans, whatever. And you know, there's always, I mean, he's clever at doing commercial things on the catwalk, but there's also even more commercial things straight down the line. Chanel that almost could have been from any year in store, and I think sort of Saint Laurent is doing a version of that. I mean, I think there's big, as you suggest, much more disconnect between the catwalk and the store.
I think it's the disconnect between the obnoxiousness and like
the
willful brashness and brattishness of the way it's presented, and the kind of like the complete lack of drama or
come hither straightforward product.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
you go on the
There's no
e-commerce
kind of
and it's all like, it's all laid out very black and white, very like click and buy me.
It's very easy. It's very like, hello, you know, friendly, like buy it.
You're right, Forever 21 is a very good description.
I'd be interested to see though, I really would be interested to see how this sells, because I think more than any other collection there is, you know, in the last collection there were still longer dresses and
Yeah.
wonderful fringe jackets and
Yeah.
shirts and everything like that. Like so much of this is so
Body conscious.
A lot
yeah,
of people
short.
really take a short
regularly
of this.
short. It doesn't.
I found it really,
Just doesn't
really
do anything.
offensive for the way it like depicted women.
It
I thought
doesn't
was
do
awful.
anything for me.
But
But no, it is true though that I do think he's hit on something where there is a girl, and I've said this from the very start, like that girl that he's thinking of. There's so many of them out there, more than you would actually think.
But they're not the ones
But
that
they're not
buy it, though. So
spending
do-
thousands
yeah.
of pounds on a jacket, are they? That is the mystery.
No, because it's always like a
Yeah.
19-year-old girl from a band that he uses as
Yeah.
his. Well, there's been a couple recently that he's used as his muse, and they're definitely not buying.
Yeah.
Well, then there are women who want to like
Yeah.
be that woman,
But
that girl again.
That's what I
then.
can't work out. I think it's really interesting because it kind of goes exactly kind of what we were saying about Celine, whereas I completely agree. I think people that go into Celine, some surely just buy a lovely leather bag, but I think a lot it is because they have an idea of the ethos, an idea of what Celine stands for. And what I can't work out with Saint Laurent, it'd be really interesting to kind of spend like a full day in one of the stores. What percentage of people literally just see it and like it as pure product, and what percentage are driven vaguely by this idea that it is kind of like the cool new thing, or whether it is, because those pieces are so strong, someone could literally walk through Selfridges and pick up the bike
But
jacket
also
and
the
not-
ad campaigns aren't as risque as
No.
the ad campaigns are pretty conservative, aren't they? I mean, they're more sort of Celine-like, and I think it's quite easy for us in the industry to get incredibly excited about catwalk shows, and rightly so. But I think maybe your average Joe, aside from the real biggies, well, I suppose this is a real biggie, but I think that they get a lot more images from. Their sense of brand comes much more from advertising and editorial in magazines than
and
it
the
does
shops,
from the catwalk.
the merchandising.
Yeah.
But with Saint Laurent, you know, it's always going to be a combination of, oh, it's Saint Laurent, like the name, you know, that they're harking back to. So it's almost like, people have maybe the average customer has also forgotten like what that house actually stands for, and like what, you know, the opium collection was, or what the Ballet Russe collection, you know, these things are like not relevant for them. So it's like the combination of having the name in the head and then seeing these clothes, you know, they're not, and the two become kind of like a pretty package.
But I think as well, even if you think of sort of the retail aspect of it, you think of the streets around the world that Saint Laurent sits on, along with the other big mega brands, and the way it's presented, which is not in a kind of 23-year-old rock star way. I think that is a big way that a very rich woman who will spend thousands of pounds on a Saint Laurent jacket sort of digests her sense of the brand, isn't it, really?
And maybe, you know, those rock stars that we discussed, and this you know, this kind of like vision of femininity, maybe this serves to capture the kind of the entry-level shoppers. So you do get, you know, those young people who do want to be this kind of girl, and they buy like the little gold-plated rings or something. They're still expensive, but they're like, you know, 200, 300 quid. Then you could get them for your 21st birthday or something. You know, if your family are going to spoil you, you wouldn't. And maybe it is about trying to capture a younger audience, get them to.
And I think when you talk to very rich women who are quite brand agnostic, who buy a lot from lots of labels, Saint Laurent is always a label that they check for tailoring. You know, so that woman who spends huge amounts, she knows where to go for what, and she knows to go to Saint Laurent for an amazing jacket, a lovely bag.
But it's this thing that like a lot of brands seem to be doing, is that with a new creative director and a new vision, is that they are trying to do that impossible task of retaining their old customer and then getting in a new one over the door. But
do you not think he's done a good job of that?
Yeah, exactly. That's what he's done. That's what apparently Alexander Wang has done. He was talking about, you know, an inspiration for his latest collection for Balenciaga, that he was thinking about the rebellious granddaughter and her grandmother's couture. So, you know, it's about trying to catch all three generations, the grandmother, the mother, and the daughter all in store. And someone told me, someone from Kenzo told me, oh yeah, our stores have now become like that, that there's the daughter, the the mother and the grandmother all shopping
I'd like to
there.
have a grandmother who wears Kenzo.
Yeah,
I mean,
Mary Berry would wear Kenzo.
Yeah, she would actually.
She'd rock a Kenzo
and
print.
bake a cake in it. Yeah.
Like, we were doing that all this morning. We rated a collection as to whether it was good about whether Hillary Clinton would wear it or not.
My goodness.
It was really good.
Why Hillary Clinton?
She's just.
Because she's running. We love her.
I mean, that was. I thought the Dior collection was really interesting, as always, in terms of the new and the old. And I think a lot of designers in Paris were trying to have their cake and eat it in the best sense. They were trying to do two things at once, be it Celine with her Celine-ness and the sort of new sexiness, and Dior, you know, it was this crazy jungle, thigh-high boots in mad colours and perspex heels. And yet also there were these coats and dresses that, you know, Grace Kelly would have worn. And I thought, you know, the contrast was more extreme than usual. I mean, some of that jungle stuff, cat suits and things, it was quite full on. And the dresses were very, very, oh, here's my yacht. And I sort of feel he kind of pulled it off in quite an impressive way. But again, how you see it in the store, I mean, how many of those crazy fringe tunic dress type things that you can see on the screen now.
But I think they'll just come with a layer underneath.
Yeah,
and those
so
fringe
there's sort
bits
of
will be
underskirt.
down.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when you do go and see his collections merchandised in Dior. It goes back to what Susie was saying about the importance of merchandising. It's like, you know, there was so much talk when he took over, which I know was a while ago now, about like how would the Dior shopper relate to what he does, but it still looks just as kind of fanciful and fluffy as the Galliano stuff in a way, because when you see it next to all those Lady Dior bags, and seeing a collection merchandise, I just think changes it so much. And it's a shame in a way, because those are the pictures that you don't see online, and it is equally as much as a part of the house's vision for a collection.
I think it's very true. It'd be really interesting to have the catwalk alongside the merchandising, because you do lose that.
Yeah.
They do, because they have the video like showing the show, and actually when they're selling like the website, customers like they actually like bring out the catwalk lookbook, and like you can buy this and the other. And but you know, when it hits the rails, it just happens to be like kind of all separated, and also sitting alongside all those things that they don't show, you know, like all the
but they
the
define, I think, the spirit of the
and
house. When you walk into a shop, it is those staples, those things, like the furniture of the store, like I don't mean the physical furniture, I mean the stuff that's there all the time,
like the Dior
signature
grey
handbags and stuff. And the palette, exactly. They really define how you would see this collection. And I think, you know, I agree, you do see the catwalk in the store, but you don't see interior shots of stores really online. And I think how people interpret a brand is, if you're not walking up and down something like Sloane Street every day, you don't get quite that sense, which is interesting.
I think it's always worth remembering as well that so much of the sales are through department stores as well. So how a brand sells within a department store is sometimes a kind of almost a bigger indicator of, because if you walk into Celine on Mount Street, you know, you're going to Celine on Mount Street, you're not just traipsing through Selfridge's food hall and you end up at Mark by Mark. You know, Mark by Mark didn't sell well at Selfridge's, even though it got such a good kind of industry response, but it's because it was next to, I can't remember, it was probably alongside things like Whistles or something. You know, it wasn't placed perhaps in a way that would grab the eye of the Mark by Mark customer, and that's why I think department stores have the hardest job of all, of how to think, right, that customer's looking for this, where's she going to go next? How's her brain going to traverse to the next label she wants to see, or will we miss her and she'll have no footfall into the other bit whatsoever?
Which is why I think the way Selfridges do it is really interesting. I'm fascinated by Selfridges as a retailer, because the way they've almost set up like these mini shops. You know, it's become more than spaces. It's like their whole refurb is like, it's almost like you're in like on different streets but inside a store. It's really, but I think it's the cleverest thing you can do, because they're almost replicating that Celine Mount Street experience of like, you can walk into Selfridges and go straight to the little Marni pod and get your Marni stuff, and sort of that browsing experience is still there if you want it, but they're not presuming, I think, that people would buy that way, which is interesting.
And again, it's a very clear illustration of why it's so important for brands to know what their story is and what they're delivering. You know, what are we about in a vague sense, but also what are the things that we're known for that we do really well? Because if you are wandering around Selfridges or down Mount Street or whatever, you need to know what you want to go into and why, don't you?
And only a few things get bought as well. That's worth remembering. You know, some of my favourite things often aren't bought, and you never see them off the catwalk, because if you're only going to have a select amount of pieces and that's what they need, a certain thing from a certain brand, which, let's be honest, most department stores need. They can't, if a collection decides to do something really, really different the next season, that's great, but that doesn't often mean that the department store will do
the buy,
which is sad, and you know, you could say that's depressing, but it's
like when you go to the Dries Van Noten Risi in Paris, and there's 800 pieces in the collection, and then we've got sort of 5.5 in Selfridges and Lucy. It's just so sad.
Yeah, well, it's like that designer's vision though, watered down, which is the sad thing. It's like, this isn't the collection that I saw in the show, and it's A, not being able to buy it, and B, it not looking like the collection that you saw.
And it is hard as well, because sometimes it's predictable what they don't put into production. Sometimes it's really not. It really is the piece that you fall in love with and everyone else has fallen in love with. You just think, why is that not?
I find that with the high street as well, though. Often after a press show, I'll get really excited and I'll be like, God, that's going to look so good on my page. And then I'll go back to them and they'll be like, no, the buyers didn't pick it up. And it's really unpredictable. Obviously, it's often to do with cost on the high street, how much it costs to produce. And I'm sure with designers as well, how much it costs to produce. Everyone's got margins.
Yeah, I do hope those jumpsuits do make it, though, to the rails. I would love someone to rock those. I would wear them.
I think it'd be you, I can totally imagine a bit of net over the top.
Yeah, it'd be great.
I'm a huge fan of what he's doing there, though, in general. Like, I just think he's kind of... I think it's not it's a breath of fresh air, yes, but also just a complete vision. To me, it just seems like the whole package.
And he hasn't sold anything out, has he? That's what's amazing, is he's completely stamped his own identity on it and a modernity on it, but all the bits for the older Dior lady are still there, the bags and the bits of lettering,
the shape of it all,
the silhouettes, like I don't,
and I love the knock-on effect it's had on his menswear design under his own name. You can see that it's really made him think about new things and challenge him and consider new propositions, and that's great, that bouncing of ideas. I think when that works well for a designer, it's amazing.
There were some great coats in this. I mean, there's so many great coats in all the cities, but lots of great coats in Paris, and he had some absolute beauties, I thought.
And the Dior and I documentary is also like the best thing.
So lovely.
Yeah, I loved how, like, in this at this show though, him and his design partner, God, the names just escaped. Peter, God, just escaped me. They came out together to take a bow.
Yes,
and I don't know whether that was a nod to the Dior and I documentary. I hope it was, because it was nice that there was that acknowledgement that it's not just, he's not a lone creative. He is, there is a team behind him, and he's acknowledging that in public, and I thought that was really nice.
I think that the sort of production of the Dior show and many others in Paris as well, one of the things that Paris does really well is it creates a whole sort of surround sound experience. I mean, and gosh, it spends money to do it, obviously above all Chanel, but so many of the shows, you really, every little detail from the, the tiles on the floor of the Celine show, or, the incredibly bonkers world of Balenciaga with all those sort of bits of sort of detritus around the place, or the, the lovely pink Dior floors or whatever. It is theatre in which every bit of the stage set has been considered, which is lovely.
Who have we missed? There's some that we haven't talked about. We haven't talked so much. We haven't talked about Com. We obviously need to discuss Margiela. We haven't talked about McQueen. And that was should we talk about Margiela before anything else?
Yes, okay.
Because that's quite a good one. Susie, what was your talk? Because you kind of screamed Margiela then.
Well, I really loved it. It's the initial reaction, I think, for people coming out of that show was that it's not Margiela, but it's great. And I would agree with that to some extent, but I think what we really need to figure out here is, how close are we to this idea of what is Margiela? How is that? What is the hard and fast definition of that? And looking at this collection in the showroom, I felt like there were lots of elements that were very, very Margiela, like the kind of linings that then turned into like coats. Lots of sort of hidden details, the sort of inside out fil de coupe kind of embroidery. I thought there were lots of elements that felt to me very Margiela. But then in the show, I think a lot of people just took away the sort of theatrics of the skulking model, the sort of hunchback stance.
What was the skulking models about?
it was about individuality. It was about that girl that's sort of stomping around, like not quite figuring, not quite comfortable in her own skin. That's what I felt anyway, without even like looking at the press notes. It looked to me like, and it's what I was saying. It's this gesture of individuality that a lot of designers have been talking about this season. Like that you can be who you want to be.
But then it's strange to make them look therefore uncomfortable.
That to me.
I found it I'm all for a strong individual woman, but I found they were quite sort of distressing almost.
But it's that awkwardness, I guess, sort of manifesting in a sort of catwalk show. That feeling of being awkward and dressing up and smearing your face with like neon paint, trying to stand out but feeling awkward while standing out. And I definitely understand that sort of sentiment, maybe as a frustrated teenager. I don't know. I don't know. I kind of
Which is interesting
that.
when you clash that idea of Margiela and Galliano, because people say that Galliano is a showman and likes doing things that stand out, and Margiela is all about kind of not fitting in as such, but being discreet and minimal and refined.
But then there were many Margiela shows that were not minimal or refined.
Exactly what we were saying, yeah.
Like in fact quite brash, like openly.
The really early stuff was incredibly kind of opulent in a very traditional sense, kind of.
So I must say I didn't see it as I saw it as Galliano, not Margiela. But I kind of think, what do you expect with a designer like Galliano? He's not going to be poured into someone else's vessel and take the shape of that. I mean, don't hire him if you don't want Galliano with all the kind of amazing bonkersness and sort of gone wrong tailoring that's sort of just unbelievably intricate, like him at his absolute best, and gone a bit wrong but ultimately right.
Again, really great coats.
I think this whole, is it Margiela or not? Strong Galliano.
It's hard though with all these old. I know this isn't a revival by any means, but it is hard when we're seeing these kind of old names reopened.
True.
And all of that that's going on. It feels like there's someone kind of reviving a house or taking over a house constantly. And I think it goes back to kind of how do you measure success?
What does it mean?
Like, some you want them to be true to it. Some no one seems to care. It's really hard to get it
right. I think there's also a danger that you can kind of fall into a pastiche of yourself. Like I think for me there's a real disconnect with the contorted model, just because I feel so strongly about fashion kind of being about the new woman, I suppose, about being comfortable and about that sense of freedom, and just I think the way that the whole industry is perceived now is so different because of the lens of social media and blah blah blah. We talk about that all the time, but I think it does just mean that that what a woman wants, she's more open about what she wants, and she's open about kind of feeling comfortable and empowered. And I just think when I look at that, I see something redolent of the past and not forward thinking, and that's why it sits uneasily with me.
I would agree, and I think because the two types of model were alongside each other, there was a really uneasy gear shift between the two, because a lot of a show is like theatre. It's about suspension of disbelief, isn't it? And they get you into their world and you go with it or you don't go with it. And for me, like you, finding that those other models quite uneasy making, it was like, ooh,
I get what he's doing. It's 100% succeeded, but that doesn't mean that it resonates with me.
Could it also be a reaction to all that kind of comfort, easy? We talk like when I don't know, I get so sick and tired of designers talking about, it's about a modern woman. Who's this modern woman? And is she this? Is this one side? Wearability. Yes, but what's wearable for one person is not wearable for another. I don't know. I disagree with this whole idea that there's this one size, one aesthetic fits all thing for women. Women come in different guises. Women have very different identities. Women have very different personalities, and there are different clothes to fit.
But it's interesting, people always say about trainers and flats, and it's like some women actually just do feel more comfortable, more in control, more like they're taken more seriously if they're wearing heels.
But then
that's fine, because they've still got that option, and it just means that more women also have another option. I don't think anyone's. I mean, I don't think you look at the Paris catwalks and think, oh, that's so wearable and comfortable. It's not. There's still a ton that as a fairly young, slim woman, I would still massively struggle with. So I don't think we've got to a point where we've lost any sense of, structure or reaching for something further. But I think it's disingenuous to forget, probably because I have to cater to that woman a lot more than I have to cater to the other. But, you know, when people are like, oh, is it really boring because you can't write about, I don't know, £5,000 gowns a lot? And I'm like, no, it's so much more challenging to work out what a woman who isn't immersed in fashion all day long wants from her clothes. And I think it's great that there is obviously still those kind of clothes for the women that want them, but I just don't think that it's really resonating with the mood now, I suppose.
But then it's interesting, I think it is, I kind of hear what Susie's saying in the sense of I do think there is this kind of mass sense of like, you know, it's great to be a woman now, you know, fashion is so respectful to women, they can kind of be comfortable, they can be...
Yes, there's choice. Choice is great.
And choice is great, but then there is this notion that actually, you know, the realities of dressing, you know, of course women still feel uncomfortable in their clothes, and of course women sometimes still feel kind of slightly awkward or slightly, you know, out of place, or like they're wearing something that doesn't quite make them feel comfortable, regardless of whether there is this big kind of trend for the easy and the choice. And I think it's interesting, given that there is a mood of kind of like, you know, women at ease, women feeling great, to kind of champion the woman who perhaps isn't.
But the discomfort's already there. Why do we need to ham it up?
Yeah, I suppose.
And the way that will filter down, though, is in a very different way from how you see it on the catwalk. I would say that broken down, there were like a really amazing suede trench coat. There was really, in the back there, the one up there, and actually it then a little tartan satin skirt like that. You know, so a lot of those clothes were like no-brainer clothes to me. If anything, I feel like he did actually water down his own aesthetic a lot to fit Margiela. And the other thing about, you know, this whole house thing is, you know, ultimately it belongs to Renzo Rosso. It's part of Only the Brave group. It isn't the Margiela that it was 25, 30 years ago. It just isn't. And you know, once we get away from that idea that it's under new ownership, it's, you know, not even called Maison Margiela, it's Maison Margiela. You know, then it has a different identity.
Yeah. People get so upset when they're like, oh, there's a new designer, it's not going to be Margiela anymore, but no one ever goes, oh, it's got a new owner, it's not going to be Margiela anymore. You know, like, I think it's just a fashion press thing, but when houses get bought, ownership changes, there's not that same sense that it's no longer kind of, you know, the ethos.
I just felt once that happened, it was already and once he had left as well, it was already a different thing for me. I had looked at those clothes,
left, which I think made it easier to have that moment of
and I guess maybe it's an insidery thing where you're thinking
it definitely is. When you think what filters, there's no better gauge, I always think, than speaking to your friends who aren't in the fashion industry, and I mean, none of that ever. There's no interest for that in the same way that I wouldn't know which hedge fund had been bought out by which other, you know.
And I think
for the general customer,
it's actually interesting the extent, you know, fashion is a massive business. It's a massive business in this country. It's a massive business in France, etc., etc. And it's actually not taken seriously by the mainstream fashion pages. You know, all this conversation, if it was a different milieu, a different industry we're talking about, would be detailed at great length in the business pages of newspapers, and rightly so. And it's actually an omission that it doesn't happen.
I was thinking about that actually when everyone was announcing and reporting on the new editor of The Guardian. Everyone was like, you know, it's going to shape the voice of culture. And you think, you know, how much fashion designers do affect kind of the cultural landscape. And you're right, Galliano was written about, This Appointment was written about, but it was always, you know, shame design returns. It wasn't kind of like great creative voice back, and this is why it's important.
I think that's because they had to be sensitive to the situation.
I just think it's because it's that hook that we talked about at the start. You sell it to a news desk and they'll go, oh yeah, of course, I remember that story. But how do we change that? How do we get people to see?
Well, I think, you know, in Italy and France it's very different. You know, they see fashion as big business and they report it accordingly.
Well, they also
both
see it as
in
an
the business
form.
pages, and also the fashion press takes it very seriously as a business proposition as well as a creative proposition. We in this country don't. I think, you know, it's interesting and exciting the degree to which London Fashion Week is becoming more and more of a commercial entity, and how well labels are selling in the States and etc. Does that mean it's going to become part of the wider business discourse? I hope so. I suspect not.
I think we have quite, compared to other European cities, I think we have quite Americanized, as a culture at large, quite an Americanized attitude to fashion, because whenever you go to Paris or to anywhere like that, there's not nearly so much fast fashion, there's not nearly so many J. Crews and Club Monacos and Rag & Bones and all of that. Like there's definitely, London definitely does, or the UK definitely has more of that sense of not, and of not looking into, of the new and of the commercial. It's I don't know if it's sad but true, or just true, that London is much more commercial than it used to be, and obviously New York is incredibly commercial. But I think it's slow progress, and that's what we have to be patient about, I suppose. But, you know, Business of Fashion has completely changed that, and that is a UK-based publication. So you can only hope that will filter
and in a
down
way, it's
to
interesting
us.
because in part it's a product of our irreverence. You know, we are much more irreverent about fashion than Paris and Milan, and that's why we create such fantastic fashion, and why London Fashion Week is so incredibly exciting. Can we keep that irreverence and that creativity and build on our commercial foundations, both in terms of what's produced and in terms of how we report it? That's a big question, I think.
Which was why this was an interesting season in a sense, because of that McQueen stuff, because I felt like there was so much discussion of McQueen, obviously this season, because of Savage Beauty, but also just because I think a lot of the most interesting articles, the most perceptive articles I read were about McQueen as like a British business, and about it's something that, you know, grew from being this kind of the young success story and the kind of fashion figure that we love so much, you know, kind of young boy who manages to kind of get into St. Martin's, etc., 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 but then turn into a big brand. And I think it's case studies like this that make people take fashion seriously. And I know there was a lot of stuff that was written that perhaps wasn't so serious, but I think you need more stuff like this, because this is what gets the public identifying with fashion. They identify with the aesthetic, but they also identify with the kind of the story and the journey.
Yeah, the McQueen label is an incredible articulation of what we were talking about, in that you cannot get a more creative, more distinct, you know, both wonderful and at times disturbing vision, and yet there was an incredible commercial nous throughout, both in terms of wearability, and, you know, in terms of just bits and pieces you can buy, be it sort of scarves or whatever. And I think Sarah Burton has really lived up to the continuation of that, and I think that this was another incredibly beautiful, breathtaking collection, with bits to take out from it. But again, I think there is obviously a big disconnect between the McQueen catwalk and McQueen in store, and you know, it's when the new season is available that we'll see just how it's been kind of iterated to buy.
Although they are like, it's sort of veering away more from that kind of demi-couture idea where like their pieces on catwalk aren't sold. I think when they went to the showroom this time, they had like, they did make, you know, a point of, you know, saying that piece will be sold, that piece will be sold. Like, you know, it's to sort of to try and connect the catwalk up
with the
back
store
up
offering.
with, because I do think recently there were a
yeah.
few years where like you'd go in and you would see like this sort of jersey dress
fit and flare. That's
yeah.
literally what you see when you go into a those fit and
And
flare
it's like
dresses.
the emblems of the collection just kind of
all
like
TV
printed on.
presenters love.
Yeah.
Which is
like
true,
a sort of
But it would be, as someone said earlier, it would be really interesting to see, I think it was you, Lou, a detailed breakdown of what sells, because we all know there's the accessories versus ready-to-wear model, but to break that down further, so if you take McQueen, how much of it is the fit, in terms of what's actually making the money, how much of it is the scarves, and how much of it is the fit and flare dresses?
Because you can kind of tell from what the kind of multi-retailers buy, but then you don't know how deep they buy in each category. So you can see what they've got, but they could have just bought like 3 of a certain thing and then like 57 of a certain
I mean, I think McQueen, in terms of the selling collection as well, is particularly interesting, because aside from the disconnect between catwalk and the selling collection, there are disconnects within the selling collection, in that there's the sort of jacket McQueen wearing woman who would not wear that fit and flare dress, and then there's the fit and flare dressed woman who wouldn't wear the jacket. So there are several.
But again,
McQueen.
it's that catering to everyone. Like that's why those showrooms like get bigger and bigger. The rails, more rails, and
but
more
I mean,
rails.
Chanel, you know, the 70-year-old woman kind of wants to wear what the 22-year-old woman is wearing. Chanel woman is wearing, just can't. If you see what I mean. Whereas I think McQueen, they don't even want to.
They differentiate.
That's interesting. I'm conscious there's a lot of people we've missed, but I'm also conscious of time. Is there anyone that someone would really like to talk about? We haven't talked about Vaccarelli, we haven't talked about Rick Owens. There's a few. But maybe we should talk about the general mood of Paris. What did we come away thinking? Was there any particular food for thought? Was it it's quite a simplistic question, but was it a strong season?
Real extremities, I think, for me. There was like everything. You've got obviously Saint Laurent, and you've got Vaccarello, which weirdly, even given that I'm not nearly always into that kind of sexiness, I just always enjoy that, the kind of whole Anya Rubik muse thing. He's really nailed, I think, which way he wants to go with it. But then obviously you had, you've got Margiela, and you've got kind of even Carven. I thought Carven was absolutely brilliant. I think they really nail who their customer is, from their prices to the products that they produce. I'm always finding stuff that I want to put on my pages from them, and I think I've forgotten their names to my detriment, but the two new guys who are at the helm of Carven, I think really signified kind of a new customer, but in the best possible way. I think that's going to speak to young women a lot, those silhouettes.
I don't know. I thought it was interesting how a lot of backstage at many shows, the designers, the things that the same phrases kept on cropping up, which was anything goes. She's an individual. She's doing her own thing.
I love how tired you sound as you say that.
I wasn't. No, it's and then these. No, I'm not tired of it. In fact, they're good sentiments for me. Like I all rise the individual, you know, like, and that's probably why we've seen these very kind of broad aesthetics, you know, like anything goes, and in fact, like what. Got so excited there to wave my glass. Mucha, at the end of Miu Miu closed Paris Fashion Week, they're like, the only thing she said backstage was, it's about having fun, you know, and I'm like, oh, okay, great. That's basically like a good sentiment to sum up like this whole season. Oh, you know, you can wear a mini skirt, you can wear a fur chubby, you can do this, you can do that, and
it was a bit of a sweet shot, wasn't it? There was lots of really juicy fruits to be picked, lots of colour, lots of shapes. I mean,
and does that mean you know, we've seen this sort of end of? I mean, there were still sort of some unifying strands. There was a lot of Victoriana, Edwardian-y kind of textiles, a lot of sort of the 60s, 70s, you know, Gesquier hangover thing, you know. There were some strands, but, you know, I did like kind of finish up Paris thinking, you know, is it really kind of the end of unifying trends? I don't know. I think it's just become so much more disparate, and because the landscape is way noisier now.
And also, just going back to one of the social media thing that we spoke about earlier on. I mean, it is just so diverse out there. There's thousands of different people on Instagram with millions of different followers, and they're all advocating totally different things. So it would be kind of weird if Paris agreed on what we should be wearing.
People coming up,
It's difficult though, because equally I think it's rubbish when people say that trends are dead. Like, you know,
it's not that they're dead, they're just so much more multi-stranded and multifaceted,
there's just so many,
and they're coming at you at different times as well, and with drops, like, you know, the high street, like dropping things like you know, very frequently.
The longevity of the trend is
and then designers themselves dropping collections frequently as well, and showing different more collections. You know, you're just having a lot of things coming at you at a more rapid kind of pace.
And then again, there are constants, aren't there? I mean,
so you don't see like a graph line going like, you know, in one direction.
But if some things do really stick, albeit in slightly different ways. You know, like Alexander Wang's Sports Luxe that was a long time ago now, but it still is now part of our language. You know, a woman will wear sweatpants with heels in a way that 20 years ago she would not. Or
that's
you know,
like a
colour is
thing, though, isn't it, rather than a
but that's what I mean. It's interesting as something that you'd have thought would be fly by night, maybe.
It's like the Valentino primness that we talked about.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, when they first start on that, it was pretty full-on message, and you could easily think, really? Well, I mean, it's lovely, but this season, but not next. And here we are, and it's still beautiful, and it still endures, and it's become a language, hasn't it?
Well, maybe we'll all be slouchily walking. Maybe that will be the thing that
sticks. Maybe it's sort of bourdongle with sweatpants.
And also walking like this.
No, I don't think we're going to be doing that, are we, Pandora?
Well, I think I think it's good that we've kind of ended the discussion kind of in an open-ended way, because I think that's what this season was about. It was about kind of posing questions rather than asking them, and kind of offering suggestions rather than sort of I guess dictating what people should wear. And
it's like Diana Vreeland, why don't you?
Why do you That's
Yes.
so good? A brilliant quote to end on. Well, should we give all the designers a round of applause for giving us stuff to chat about?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.